At 8:12 that morning, my sister texted me one line that ended 15 years of family peace. "I'm quitting my job, you'll take care of us while I figure things out." No greeting, no guilt, just expectation. I wiped my hands, stared at the message, and typed 4 words I'd never said before. "That's not on me." Then I opened my laptop and signed the overseas contract waiting in my inbox. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up again, Mom. But what she wrote next didn't just test my patience. It forced me to choose between blood and freedom. Before we dive in, hit like and tell me, have you ever been the responsible one who finally said no? When people talk about family, they like to use soft words: support, love, home. No one ever talks about weight. The kind that doesn't sit on your shoulders, it lives in your decisions, in the way you hesitate before spending money on yourself, in the way your phone lighting up can make your stomach drop before you even read the message. I've carried that weight for as long as I can remember. My name is Emma Pierce. 32, operations manager. The kind of person who plans vacations in spreadsheets and double-checks receipts before filing them away. The kind of person people rely on. Or, more accurately, the kind of person people lean on until she bends. In my family, I was the stable one. It sounded like a compliment when I was younger. It wasn't. It meant I didn't get to fall apart. It meant I didn't get to be uncertain. It meant I didn't get to say no. Sunday dinners were our ritual. Always the same mom moving between the kitchen and the table. Dad with the TV humming in the background. Jenna arriving just late enough to be noticed. From the outside, we looked like something out of a catalog. Inside, everything had a quiet pattern. "Emma, could you grab the check?" Dad would say, not even looking up. "Your sister's just figuring things out right now," Mom would add gently, passing me the bread like she was handing over responsibility. Jenna would smile soft, grateful, perfectly timed. She didn't ask. She didn't have to. By the time the check came, my wallet was already open. At first, it was small things: covering dinner, helping with rent just this once, adding her to my phone plan because it was cheaper that way. Then it grew: car insurance, vet bills for a dog I'd never met, utilities when my parents had a tight month. Every request came wrapped in something harmless: a favor, a temporary fix, family helping family. But temporary has a way of becoming permanent when no one pushes back, and I never did, because somewhere along the way, I started confusing being needed with being loved. It wasn't something anyone said out loud, it was something I felt. In the way Mom's voice softened when I stepped in. In the way Dad stopped worrying when I handled things. In the way Jenna hugged me just a little tighter when I said yes. I told myself that meant something. That it mattered. That I mattered. Mike saw it differently. We'd been together for almost a year when he first said it quietly, like he didn't want to scare me off. "They don't love you because you fix everything," he said, watching me scroll through a list of payments on my phone. "They love you because you make things easy." I laughed it off, not because it was funny, because it was uncomfortable. Because if he was right, then everything I thought I understood about my family shifted. "They're just going through a phase," I said. "It'll even out." Mike didn't argue. He just nodded, like someone watching a storm roll in from far away. The truth is, I believed in that even. Mom always said it. Family evens out in the end. But no one ever explained how. Because from where I stood, even looked like this every time someone else fell short. I stepped further in. Every time someone needed more, I gave a little extra. Every time something broke, I became the fix. And the more I did, the more it became expected. Not appreciated, not acknowledged, expected. The shift was so gradual I didn't notice it happening. Until one night, sitting alone in my apartment, I opened my notes app and scrolled. It wasn't just a list anymore. It was a record. Phone plan, insurance, rent assistance, utilities, deposits. Line after line of quiet agreements I never actually made out loud. I stared at it longer than I should have. Not because of the money, because of what it meant. This wasn't support. It was structure, a system. And I was the foundation. The realization didn't hit like a crash. It was quieter than that, more dangerous, because, for the first time, a question slipped in small, but impossible to ignore. What happens if I stop? I didn't have an answer yet, but I was about to find out. At first, nothing changed in a way that felt dramatic enough to name. There was no single moment where someone stood up and said, "From now on, Emma will take care of everything, if anything." It was the opposite. The absence of any formal agreement made it easier for everyone to slide into a new normal without ever acknowledging that it was happening. The requests didn't stop, they simply stopped sounding like requests. Mom no longer prefaced things with, "Could you?" or "Would you mind?" She would call in the middle of the day and say something like, "Your dad forgot to pay the electric again, but I told them you'd handle it," in the same tone someone might use to mention the weather. Jenna stopped explaining why she needed help and started sending screenshots, rent balances, overdue notices, a car repair estimate, each one arriving without context, as if the explanation was unnecessary because the outcome had already been decided, and for a long time. I played along with that unspoken script. Part of me told myself it was easier this way. There was no awkward conversation, no confrontation, no need to draw lines I wasn't sure I knew how to defend. I could just step in, fix the problem, and everything would go back to normal, or at least, back to something that resembled peace. But what I didn't realize then was that the normal I was preserving wasn't stability, it was dependence. By the time fall came around, that dependence had hardened into something that felt less like a habit and more like infrastructure. My payments weren't exceptions anymore. They were built into the way my family functioned. Bills were planned around my involvement. Decisions were made with my resources in mind. Even conversations had changed, subtly but unmistakably, shifting from "if Emma can help" to "when Emma takes care of it." The first time it really unsettled me wasn't during a big crisis. It was something smaller, almost forgettable on the surface. Jenna sent me a message one afternoon, a screenshot of a shopping cart filled with what she called brand essentials for a project she was working on. There was no question attached, no explanation of what the project actually was, just the image and a follow-up text that read, "I'll send you the total." I remember staring at that message longer than I should have. Not because the amount was outrageous, but because of how casual it felt. There was no hesitation in her tone, no awareness that she was asking for something. It was as if she were simply passing along information I was already expected to act on. I ended up paying for it, not because I agreed with it, and not even because I believed it was necessary, but because saying no at that point felt like disrupting something much larger than a single purchase. It felt like pulling at a thread that might unravel everything. So I didn't pull, I paid, and the system held. A week later, I went over for Sunday dinner, and everything looked exactly the same as it always had. Mom moving between the stove and the table, Dad flipping channels, the familiar rhythm of a family that appeared, at least from the outside, completely intact. Jenna arrived late, as usual, but this time there was something different in the way she carried herself. There was a kind of lightness to her, almost like relief, as if a decision had already been made and she was waiting for the rest of us to catch up. We hadn't even finished eating when she set her fork down and leaned back slightly, drawing just enough attention to herself without having to ask for it. "I quit my job," she said. The words landed softly, but the reaction around the table was immediate. Mom's face shifted first, not into concern, but into something closer to admiration. "Oh, honey," she said, reaching across the table as if Jenna had just shared something brave rather than risky. That must have taken so much courage. Dad nodded slowly, the way he did when he wanted to signal approval without getting into details. "Sometimes you've got to trust your instincts," he added, taking a sip of his drink. I didn't say anything right away. I watched Jenna instead, trying to understand whether there was any trace of uncertainty behind her expression, any sign that she recognized the weight of what she had just announced. There wasn't. It was toxic, she continued, as if she were explaining a decision that had already been validated. "I've been miserable for months. And I finally realized I can't keep sacrificing my mental health just to stay comfortable. Mom squeezed her hand. You did the right thing. Jenna smiled, reassured, then glanced in my direction for a fraction of a second before looking away again. That glance told me everything. She wasn't worried about what came next, because in her mind, what came next was already handled. The rest of the conversation moved on, drifting into safer topics, but I could feel something settling into place beneath the surface, something unspoken but fully understood by everyone at that table. Jenna hadn't just quit her job, she had transferred the uncertainty somewhere else. And that somewhere was me. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from Mom, sent with the same quiet certainty I had come to recognize all too well. Jenna's going to need a little support for a while, just until she figures things out. I read it once, then again, noticing what wasn't there. No question, no timeline, no plan, just an assumption, wrapped in gentle language that I would step in the way I always had. I set my phone down slowly, feeling something shift inside me, not sudden, not explosive, but steady and undeniable, like a door closing somewhere deep in my chest. For the first time, the situation didn't feel like a temporary inconvenience I could manage. It felt like a future I was being written into without my consent. And somewhere between that realization and the quiet of my apartment, a thought formed with a clarity I couldn't ignore. If I didn't change something now, nothing ever would. The message came on a Tuesday morning, at exactly 8:12 a.m., in the middle of a routine so ordinary it almost felt scripted. I was standing in my kitchen, half awake, waiting for the coffee machine to finish its slow, uneven drip while scrolling through emails I wasn't really reading. The light coming through the window was soft, the kind that makes everything look calm, manageable, like nothing unexpected could possibly happen in a day that had started so quietly. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced down without thinking, expecting something work-related, maybe a calendar reminder or a last-minute update from my team. Instead, I saw Jenna's name. There was no build-up, no good morning, no attempt to ease into whatever she was about to say. Just a single line, sitting there with the kind of certainty that didn't leave room for interpretation. I'm quitting my job, you'll take care of us while I figure things out. For a moment, I didn't move. It wasn't shock. Exactly. It was something slower, heavier, like my brain was trying to catch up to a reality it had already been preparing for without fully admitting it. I read the message again, this time more carefully, as if I might have missed a detail that would soften it. There wasn't one. No hesitation. No acknowledgement of what she was asking. No space for me to respond in any way other than the one she had already decided on. I realized, standing there with my phone still in my hand, that this wasn't really a request. It was a conclusion. Somewhere along the way, Jenna, and if I was being honest, the rest of my family too, had stopped seeing my help as something I chose to give. It had become something they factored in, something they relied on with the same certainty you rely on electricity or running water. And just like that, the question wasn't, would I help? It was, why wouldn't I? The coffee machine clicked behind me, signaling it was done, but I didn't move to pour it. I was still staring at the screen, feeling a strange kind of stillness settle over me, as if everything else had momentarily gone quiet to make space for this one decision. For years, my instinct in moments like this had been automatic. Fix it, send the money, make sure everything stays stable. I didn't even think about it anymore, it was muscle memory. But this time, something interrupted that pattern. It wasn't dramatic. There was no surge of anger, no sudden rush of defiance. It was a voice, not loud, not urgent, just clear. You've been paying for permission to be loved. Mike had said it weeks ago, almost casually, but the words came back now with a weight they hadn't carried before. Standing there in my kitchen, I realized how true they felt, not in a way that made me resent my family, but in a way that made me see the situation without the filter I had been using for years. If I said yes again, Nothing would change. Jenna wouldn't suddenly become independent. My parents wouldn't suddenly stop relying on me. The system I had helped build would simply continue, stronger than before, because I had reinforced it one more time. And if I said no, I didn't know exactly what would happen, but I knew it would be different. My thumb hovered over the screen. The blinking cursor in the message box waiting for a response I had never given before. For a second, I hesitated, not because I didn't know what I wanted to say, but because I understood, maybe for the first time, what it would cost. Saying no wouldn't just be about this moment. It would change how they saw me. It would change how I saw myself. It would shift a balance that had been in place for years, and there was no way to do that quietly. I exhaled slowly, letting the hesitation pass. And then I typed 4 words. That's not on me. I read them once before sending, noticing how simple they looked on the screen compared to everything they represented. No explanation, no apology, no softening, just a boundary. My finger tapped send. And for a brief second, nothing happened. Then the message delivered. The silence that followed was immediate and almost surreal. No typing bubble, no instant reply. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. As if the world had paused for a moment to acknowledge what had just happened. I set my phone down on the counter and stood there, waiting for the familiar wave of guilt to hit. It didn't. What I felt instead was something unfamiliar light, but not in a way that made me feel careless. It was more like a tension I hadn't realized I was holding had finally loosened, just enough for me to notice the difference. I walked into the living room, still trying to process what I had just done. And that's when I saw it. My laptop was open on the coffee table, the screen exactly where I had left it the night before, the Dublin contract. I had been staring at that document for weeks, opening it, reading through it, closing it again without ever making a decision. Every time I got close to signing, a different concern would stop me. Mom would worry. Jenna would need help. Dad would say I was being selfish. There was always a reason to wait. Now, standing there with my phone still silent and those 4 words already sent, I realized something that felt almost obvious in hindsight. There would always be a reason to wait, unless I chose not to. I sat down slowly, my eyes scanning the contract again. But this time, it didn't feel like a distant possibility or a complicated risk. It felt like an option, one that belonged entirely to me. My cursor hovered over the signature line, and for a moment, I thought about everything that would change if I clicked. The distance, the conversations, the expectations I would no longer be able to meet even if I wanted to. Then I thought about what would happen if I didn't. Nothing. Everything would stay exactly the same. That was the answer. I clicked. The screen refreshed almost instantly, a small notification appearing in the corner. Document completed. It was such a quiet confirmation for something that felt so significant, almost anticlimactic in its simplicity. But as I sat there, looking at those 2 words, I felt it again, that same shift, only deeper this time. Not relief, not excitement, something steadier, like I had finally stepped into a decision instead of being pulled along by one. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up again. Mom. Her name appeared on the screen, bright and insistent, cutting through the calm that had settled around me. I didn't reach for it right away. I just looked at it, already understanding that whatever came next wouldn't be about trying to understand me. It would be about pulling me back, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I was willing to go. I didn't open Mom's message right away. For years, I had trained myself to respond quickly to smooth things over before they escalated, to anticipate what she might say and get ahead of it before it turned into something bigger. That instinct was still there, lingering just beneath the surface. But this time, I let it sit. When I finally unlocked my phone, the message was exactly what I expected, and somehow still heavier than I was prepared for. If you won't help your sister, don't come to Thanksgiving. There was no anger in the wording, No raised voice or dramatic punctuation. That almost made it worse. It read like a simple consequence, something reasonable and unavoidable, as if my refusal had naturally led to this outcome and there was nothing more to discuss. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, feeling the familiar pull of guilt trying to reassert itself. Thanksgiving had never really been about the holiday itself. It was about belonging, about showing up and reinforcing the idea that no matter what happened during the year, we were still a unit. And now, with one sentence, that sense of belonging had been turned into leverage. A few months ago, it would have worked. I would have apologized. Even if I didn't fully understand what I had done wrong, I would have offered a compromise, maybe agreed to help just for now, telling myself I could figure out how to fix things later. But as I read the message again, something about it felt different, not because it hurt less, because I could see it more clearly. This wasn't about Thanksgiving. It wasn't about Jenna's situation, or even about family unity. It was about control, about making sure that my no didn't stand long enough to become real. I set my phone down without replying. But the silence didn't last. Within minutes, the group chat lit up. "Dad, we expect you here tonight. We need to talk this through like adults. Jenna, you're overreacting. You didn't even ask what my plan is. Mom family doesn't walk away from each other like this." I watched the messages stack on top of each other, each one carrying a slightly different tone, but the same underlying message come back. Fix this, restore the balance. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to jump in and manage it. I felt outside of it. "I won't be there," I typed finally, keeping it simple, resisting the instinct to explain myself in a way that would make them more comfortable. The response was immediate. The typing bubbles appeared, disappeared, reappeared again, like a conversation unfolding faster than I could follow. "Dad, watch your tone. Jenna, I can't believe you're doing this to me right now. Mom, we are trying to help you understand what family means." I muted the conversation. The quiet that followed felt almost unnatural, like stepping out of a room where everyone was talking at once and closing the door behind you. But they weren't done. At 6:52 p.m., the doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I even checked. Dad stood on the other side, shoulders squared, his expression set in that familiar way he used when he had already decided how a conversation was going to end. "Open the door." "Emma." His voice carried through the wood, firm but controlled. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting lightly against the frame, feeling the weight of what this moment represented. If I opened the door, I knew exactly how it would go. They would explain, they would justify, they would remind me of everything I owed them. And somehow, by the end of it, I would be the one apologizing. "No," I said, loud enough for him to hear. There was a pause on the other side, followed by a sharp exhale. "Don't do this," he replied, the control in his voice thinning just slightly. "We're trying to fix this." "I'm not playing a game," I said. "I just don't agree with you." The silence that followed stretched longer this time, and when he finally spoke again, the edge was gone, replaced by something colder. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," I answered, "but it's mine." A few seconds later, I heard his footsteps moving away. I locked the door, even though it was already locked, and leaned back against it, letting the tension settle slowly instead of pushing it away. The next day, the approach shifted, less direct, more calculated. Mom called in the afternoon, her tone softer than before, almost fragile. "Sweetheart," she began, "Jenna's trying to build something for herself. This could really change her life, but she needs someone stable to stand behind her. Just for a little while." I didn't respond right away, waiting for her to finish. She found an opportunity. Mom continued, her voice steadying as she moved into explanation. "A business loan. It's not as big as it sounds, and it would give her the start she needs. All she needs is someone to co-sign." There it was. Not help, not support, a commitment, how much I asked. Even though part of me already knew. $150,000, she said, quickly, like saying it faster might make it sound smaller. It's not even your money. Emma, it's just your name. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the number settle, not just as a figure, but as a reality, a liability, a risk, a responsibility that wouldn't disappear if things went wrong. You're asking me to guarantee a $150,000 loan, I said slowly, for someone who quit her job yesterday. Mom's tone shifted again, the softness giving way to something firmer, more insistent. You're her sister, she replied. This is what family does. I let the silence stretch just long enough for the meaning of that sentence to fully land. Then I answered, calm and steady. No. There was a pause, sharper this time, like something had snapped on the other end of the line. You're being selfish, she said. Maybe, I replied, but I'm also being responsible. You'll regret this, she added, her voice tightening. I thought about that for a second, not defensively, not reactively, but honestly. I might, I said, but I won't regret taking on something I never agreed to. I ended the call before she could respond, setting the phone down with a finality that felt different from anything I had done before. Because this time, I wasn't just refusing a request, I was refusing the role that came with it. The call ended, but the silence didn't feel empty. It felt defined, for years. Every decision I made around my family had been reactive. Something happened, and I adjusted. I stepped in, filled the gap, absorbed the pressure until things settled again. This time was different, for the first time. I wasn't waiting for the next problem. I was deciding what would and wouldn't reach me. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. Not because there was something urgent to fix, but because there were things I needed to end. My banking app loaded slowly. Familiar accounts and recurring payments lining up on the screen like a quiet history of everything I had carried without question. For a moment, I hovered there, not out of doubt, but out of awareness. Each line represented a version of me who had believed she was doing the right thing, who had equated giving more with loving better. I didn't resent her, but I wasn't going to keep being her. One by one, I started making changes. I removed my name from the family phone plan, pausing just long enough to double-check that there were no hidden connections that would pull me back in later. I canceled the auto pay tied to my parents' utilities, knowing exactly when the next bill would be due and choosing, deliberately, not to cover it. I unlinked Jenna's car insurance, the same policy I had adjusted twice in the past year when she missed payments and needed a little help. Each confirmation message appeared in the corner of the screen, small and impersonal. Change saved. Auto pay disabled. Account updated. None of them captured the weight of what I was doing, because this wasn't about money. It was about structure, and I was dismantling it piece by piece. My phone buzzed halfway through, the familiar vibration sharp against the quiet of the room. I glanced at the screen without picking it up. Jenna this time, then Mom, then a message in the group chat. I didn't open any of them. Not yet. I finished what I was doing first. When the last connection was removed, I leaned back slightly, exhaling in a way that felt deeper than relief. It wasn't the absence of tension. It was the presence of something new, clarity, maybe, or ownership, whatever it was. It felt steady. Only then did I pick up my phone. There were more messages than I expected, but their content wasn't surprising. Jenna. So you're just cutting me off like this, Mom. I hope you understand what you're doing to this family. Dad. This isn't how we raised you. I read through them slowly, not rushing, not reacting, letting each one land without letting it pull me back into the role they were trying to reassign to me. Then I opened the group chat and typed, I'm not cutting you off. I'm stepping back from financial support. The typing bubbles appeared almost instantly. Jenna. That's the same thing. Emma. Mom. You can't separate money from family like that. I held my phone in my hand, considering that statement more carefully than I ever had before. They believed that. Not as manipulation, not even as strategy, as truth. And maybe that was the real problem. I can, I replied, and I am. There was a pause, longer this time, as if they were recalibrating, trying to figure out how to respond to something that didn't fit into the patterns we had always followed. Dad responded first. So what does that mean? I took a moment before answering, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to be precise. It means I'm still your daughter. I'm still your sister. I will show up. I will call. I will be part of this family. I paused, then added the part that mattered most. But I'm not your backup plan anymore. The silence that followed felt different from the ones before. Not tense, not waiting. Settled. Jenna didn't reply again. Mom sent one last message, I don't agree with this, and Dad left the chat entirely. I set my phone down and let the quiet return. But this time, it didn't feel like something fragile that could be broken at any moment. It felt like something I had built. Later that night, I sat by the window, watching the city move in the distance, thinking about everything that had changed and everything that hadn't. I hadn't left. I hadn't disappeared. I hadn't stopped loving them, but I had stopped carrying them, and for the first time in a long time, that difference felt like enough.